Hey, it says it's
Yay, we are
live.
live. Finally, let's be trying this again. Hi, Dr. Andrea. How are you?
I am hanging in there with you. Oh my gosh, what a ride.
Yeah. So we really were on here at 7 o'clock, you guys, and I was eight.
Yes,
But you,
absolutely.
but you know what's so funny? I had some people actually inbox me and say, "Oh my goodness, I'm not going to be home by 7." So guess what? It's now 8. So here you
There you
are.
go.
See,
So
everything happens for a reason.
somebody needed to hear this a little bit later, and here we are.
Here we are. I'm so glad you're here. You guys, this is Dr. Andrea Cunard. She is with Phenix Counseling in Orlando, Florida. And she was once upon a time my professor at
Yay.
Palm Beach Atlantic University here in Orlando. And I just love her. I'm so thankful for the gift that she has inside of her that God has given her. And so I asked her to come on and she said yes. Yes. I'm so excited
Yay.
because she's an expert in her field. She has compassion and a passion for others. And so today we're going to be talking about trauma and triggers. And so I asked Dr. Andrew to just kind of take it away and go where she
Mhm.
feels led to go. We'll do our best to answer some of the questions you sent, as well as any if you come in the comments. Okay. And if you have any
Yeah.
private questions that you feel like we can try to get to, just inbox us. Okay. All right. Awesome. Here we
Mhm.
go.
All right. So I will try to keep an eye on the comments so that I can kind of be responsive as people have questions. But and I kind of was gotten rolling into this when we tried the first time, but I was talking about the fact that when with everything that we're going through right now, there's plenty of opportunities, unfortunately, to tap into previous trauma that we've experienced.
Mm-hmm.
So with your audience in particular, we're looking at people who have been involved in a domestic violence situation. And usually that type of situation goes on for a period of time, right? It's not just a one-time episode usually, and then you move on with your life. Usually this is some damage to us emotionally, mentally, all of those areas. And so even though we are now in a new phase of our lives, we're safe now in a different situation, reacting in ways that maybe don't make sense. We're like, what is wrong with you? And then you start hearing this term triggers, and you're starting to put the pieces together and realize, okay, the way that I'm reacting and the way I'm feeling right now, these memories, these flashbacks, these experiences that I'm having relate to this experience that I had maybe even years ago, right? I see someone mentioning that they are doing ART therapy. And they've found that it helps with their triggers. And that is actually related to what I'm going to talk about, actually.
Oh, awesome.
Because what I wanted to do tonight was kind of unpack just a little bit the science of what's happening in regards to triggers. Because I find that when we understand what's happening, it that in and of itself is so calming, because then you don't quite feel so weird, so out of control. You can understand that, okay, there's a legitimate process happening here. And what I love about understanding the science is it usually inspires greater compassion towards ourselves, right?
Good,
yeah. We can just say, okay, I know what's going on here. And so I can be kind to myself. I can soothe myself. I can understand why this is happening, rather than what we tend to do is we tend to beat ourselves up. And what is wrong with me? You need to pull it together. This is ridiculous, or whatever it is that we say to ourselves. And that just, of course, makes it worse, right? Hey, hi, Barb. You see a little bit of roll call here. So let me talk a little bit really quickly about the science of what's happening when we feel triggered. And then we can kind of jump into where to go from there. Obviously, the next step would be, all right, what do I do with that? But then we'll see if there's any questions that we can kind of engage at that point. Okay. So when you go through traumatic situations, so domestic violence situation is absolutely traumatic. And one of the things I want to caution you is, I think what I find consistently with people who've been through trauma is they tend to minimize and compare. Oh, well, and so has it worse than me, or, well, mine wasn't so bad, at least, whenever you hear that term, at least,
that's good. Yeah.
We know what's about to happen. We're minimizing, right? And so a lot of times people will minimize their trauma by looking around at other stories and feeling like, well, mine wasn't that bad. So, I'm okay. It really wasn't that big of a deal. And the thing about trauma is and we're going to talk about this, and when it's stored in the body, your body does not care. Your brain does not care what other people have been through, right?
Yeah, that's so true.
All it knows is its own experience. So trauma is trauma, and it's really important to try to get away from this whole business of comparing. So when you go through a traumatic situation, what is activated in those situations is what we call the primitive brain, which is at the back of the head. It's the lower part of the brain in the back. And it's the kind of the informal name for it is primitive brain, but it's also the official system back there is called the limbic system. That is a part of the brain that's responsible to respond to danger or any kind of threat in our environment. So when you experience a trauma situation, anything associated with that trauma, so smells, certain colognes or certain things that were in the situation at the time in the home, sights, so a certain look on a person's face or types of clothing or decor that might have been in the room at the time, sounds. So sometimes certain breathing sounds, breathing patterns, or certain music, or certain sounds of equipment, or, just any kind of noise that was there at the time of the trauma. All of these sensory data points get filed away in the limbic system as associated with danger, right? Okay. So and that's what our brains are designed to do. Our brains are designed for survival. And so the brain will record that data and say, okay, these sights, these sounds, these smells, these textures, these touches are associated with danger. So here we are minding our own business, living our lives. We are out of that situation. We are safe now. Everything's fine. But something like COVID comes along and we're locked down. Talk about trigger.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can't leave. Right? What might that do in terms of being very reminiscent of a previous situation where we couldn't leave and where we were trapped in a setting and could not get away? Or maybe we're exposed for whatever reason to a smell or a sound or a certain way of being as somebody that's in our home with us that reminds us. And even though intellectually you and I can look at each other and we can say, we know this has nothing to do with anything, but guess what? Yeah. The limbic system is going off and saying, danger, 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 we are in trouble. And so our brain goes into danger response mode. Let me look real quick at the comments. Okay, yeah, I'm seeing a lot of folks kind of relating to what I'm saying. Something will happen, a smell or a voice or anything. Exactly. That's exactly it. And this is why, because your limbic system has been programmed that these things mean danger. So when your limbic system gets activated, it will send messages to the rest of your brain to shut down. We now need to go into, as Vanessa said, fight or flight mode, but it's fight, flight, freeze, or appease. Those are the 4 responses that we have to choose from when we are in danger. So if it's fight mode, then we get angry, we get irritable, we're crabby, we're like lashing out at people, and we can't understand why we're doing that. If it's flight mode, then we either will detach from relationships, even though there's no danger there, or we shut down, something that we call dissociation, where the brain literally turns off because it's not going to, it's overloaded. So the brain turns off. If we go into freeze mode, then we're paralyzed and we can't respond. We can't make decisions. We feel foggy. We can't seem to do anything. Or appease mode is when we go into people pleasing mode, and appease may be what some of you had to do in order to survive, right? And get out alive, you had to appease. So those are the things that get activated when the limbic system gets activated, and then it shuts down the rest of the brain because now we have to send all the resources to survival. So we've now shut off the part of the brain that tells us, hey, whoa, it's okay. Let's take a minute. Let's calm down. And so survival mode, like Sherry said, and so that is a very real neurological process that is designed for our safety. It's designed for our survival. And it's probably what got you where you are today in terms of now being a survivor, right? So it was necessary. It was a beautifully important system that you had to use to get to where you are now. Problem is, we have trouble turning it off. Right? So now we're in a situation where we're relatively safe and we're okay, but we're still having these reactions, or maybe we're having flashbacks or memories that put us right back in that feeling of fear and panic and danger. So it's important to understand the science behind what's happening so that, like I said, you can have compassion towards yourself and you can know, okay, this is a very normal reaction that my brain has developed in order to keep me safe.
Okay.
So
that's so good, by the way. That was,
okay.
That was
good.
Content that was good. I know that they're taking notes. We have fight, flight, freeze, and appease, which is a new one for me. Which survivors we do. That's a natural thing. We just want to survive the moment. We
exactly.
don't want to too much or hurt the children, so we appease to whatever they want in the moment. So that was really good. Someone asked, how long can a freeze mode last?
It's different for everybody. And I think with all four of those reactions, everybody has the one that they go to the most. And then everybody goes into that mode for different lengths of time. And I think what I've noticed is that it depends a lot of times on the kind of trauma that you came out of. Because remember, there's the term that we use in the counseling world is things like the body remembers or the body keeps score. The body remembers what you went through. And so chances are your freeze mode will probably last as long as it used to have to last in your original trauma.
That is so good. That is so good. Okay. Did you hear that? So while we're thinking we're not in that situation anymore, why is this lasting for so long? It's used to last for that long, so it's probably going to last.
Exactly. Okay. Exactly. Because again, your limbic system was programmed to respond a certain way for a certain length of time based on what was going on an ongoing basis. And the longer that you were in that situation, the deeper that programming goes. And so the more likely your brain is to absolutely go to the wiring that was set up during that trauma. So it's really important to understand that so that you don't beat yourself up and you understand why it's so hard to kind of come out of that. So you may have physically come out of that situation, but sometimes you feel like, good Lord, emotionally, mentally, I feel like I'm back there. You're like, what is wrong with me? Well, that's the science behind what's happening and why it's so difficult to move out of that.
I'm sorry. I'm just so glad that you said that because I think you made a really good point. But as survivors, we kind of do beat ourselves up. We do because I shouldn't feel like this anymore. Why am I still going through this? Why am I feeling
exactly
this? And I want to go back on one more point that you said. You said, don't compare your trauma. And we have a tendency to do this. Oh my goodness, they lost their arm. Oh my goodness, they were strangled. Oh, I was just, verbally abused. We tend to do that. Well, at least it didn't happen this way, or at least, and that is minimizing really what happened to us because our trauma is our trauma.
Absolutely. And do you think for 1 minute the limbic system is comparing notes with anybody else's trauma? No. All it knows is that I'm in danger and I'm going to activate and take over. And so what happens is what we call the amygdala hijack. So the amygdala is the part of the brain that will then pump out the hormones, the adrenaline, the cortisol that says, danger, danger, we need to respond. And the amygdala takes over, everything else shuts down, and we're off and running. So whatever that looks like for you. For some people, it's rage, it's anger, it's lashing out. For other people, it's shutting down. For other people, it's freezing. For other people, it's that complete shutting down of self and appeasing whoever is in front of them in the moment, even if it's not necessary. You're like, what is happening? Why do I keep doing that? And a couple of people I've noticed have said, you know, that they totally relate to the appeasing thing, and it's what they had to do to survive.
Right.
I see Sierra is asking me, how can you stop appeasing? I used to have a voice a lot more than I do now. This kind of goes into where I was going to go, and which is, all right, once we understand that, then what? You know, what do we do with that? And I think the important thing is once you understand what's happening, you understand that your mission now is to reprogram your brain and convince your brain with new evidence that I really, truly am safe now. Okay. So it's not as simple as simply moving out, establishing your own place, you know, kind of getting back on your feet. Those things are extremely important. Yes. But the brain is not convinced by just that. It needs an entire reprogramming process. Danielle, how do you forgive yourself after reacting to a trigger? Okay. Ooh, I'll end with that, Danielle. So let's talk about addressing the triggers first. So when you find yourself triggered and you go into whatever mode is your mode, whether it's appease mode, freeze mode, fight mode, flight mode, hopefully by practicing what we're talking about today, you can begin to at least notice it, right? And here, let me tell you how it typically goes. When you first get this information, well, how it tends to work is that you start to notice it after it happened, right? So just because you heard me say this today doesn't mean that you're now going to magically catch yourself when you're doing it. What most likely happens is it'll start to happen. It'll continue. You'll react in whatever way you react. And then afterwards, you're going to look back and you're going to go, oh my gosh, that's exactly what she was talking about.
Okay. I totally went into flight mode just now.
Exactly. And so, you know, what's really cool, and this speaks a little bit to Danielle's question, you can go back, circle back around then and deal with whoever may have been involved in your reaction. And you can have that conversation because now you can explain it. Doesn't excuse it. Doesn't mean that everything is all hunky dory. But if this is a healthy relationship with this person, it'll be helpful for them to begin to understand with you what just went down there. Okay.
Yeah, that's
so you begin to notice it after the fact. And if you are diligent about really processing it after you notice it, whether it's talking with someone or talking with a counselor or, you know, talking with another friend who wasn't involved but can help you process, what'll begin to happen is over time, you'll notice it while it's happening. Right? So the awareness will get a little bit quicker and a little bit quicker. So now you are literally in the mode, but you're also able at the same time to go, oh my gosh, I'm in freeze mode right now. Or as you are yelling and in your fight mode, you can literally, as the words are coming out of your mouth, there's a part of you that's going, you are totally in fight mode right now. And then again, if you can stop the moment you realize it and sort of process it, then you'll make that progress. And then eventually you get to the point where you're able to catch it right when the trigger happens. Okay. And you're able to respond differently. Okay. So please know it's a process. This is not something that just because you now know this information, that means tomorrow I'm good. I can turn this around. So, let me see how to support them in this. I wasn't sure how to be in disagreement. Okay. Yeah, that's a really great question, John. If you are in relationship with someone who was in an abusive relationship, how can I be supportive? And so that's one way that you can be supportive is to have this conversation with them about triggers and what's happening neurologically. And then say, you know, can we work together to begin to notice maybe when that's happening and ask that person, when this is happening, what's the most supportive thing I can do for you? You know, and that's going to be different for everybody. Some people will want you to just sit quietly with them and just hold them and let them kind of work through their fight, flight, fright response, whatever it is. Some people, especially if you're an appeaser, what might be helpful is to have that other person kind of like call it out and say, are you feeling the need to appease right now? Because I feel like you just went into appease mode, you know? And so those are ways that you can be supportive if you are in a relationship with someone who was in an abusive relationship. But you kind of have to have that communication to be able to figure out the ways that work for that person. But the more you understand what's happening neurologically and what's happening with the brain and why people react into triggers the way they do, the better able you'll be to have that conversation with the other person. So
yeah, that's really good, Dr. Andrea. I just want to say that's really good, especially, for myself, I'm remarried and my husband can't do like things like yell or slam a door, or that doesn't work for me.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
But we had to have this conversation. He's like, why are you such a, he's like, I was just closing the door of the window. I was like, that doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
Because my brain remembers it as this, after that, or after you raise your voice, then comes the hit, or then comes the argument or the fight. And so you have to really communicate with the person that you're with and letting them know, hey, this is a trigger for me, or this happened. And it's a lot better, but I'm telling you, it doesn't just go away. Just because
absolutely. And I love that you bring that up, because it could be something as simple as a certain look.
Yeah, that's so
right.
I was like, wow.
If you are in a relationship with someone and they, get upset about something and they get a certain look on your face, and that look was associated with your abuser, that can be a real issue. And so there has to be an ability to have conversations about that. And, it's something that personally, and I don't think Justin would mind me sharing this a little bit, but, in his background, he's got some significant abuse that he's dealt with. And so we've had conversations about, triggers like raised voices or even certain sounds, that are problematic. And so just when you understand this whole neurological thing, it really gives you the power to then have this conversation with your loved ones to explain what is happening.
I think it kind of feels like it takes the fault off of you, the blame off of you as a survivor. I just don't feel so guilty because it's my body has built, it was created that way to remember these things. Because
exactly.
It's like a bear in the wild, the bear is going to attack you. Your body knows you run and protect yourself. You don't expect that to happen in your home. But now that we know that as survivors is part of something that our body has trained itself to learn and to do, it makes so much more sense. And I think we can have grace with ourselves.
Exactly. And Vanessa said she's always afraid to have this conversation with a new partner. And I think one of the things that I would encourage us to remember is that every single person walking the face of this earth has their own struggles. I think a lot of times when you've been in an abusive relationship, you can kind of develop this mindset that, there's something wrong with me, or I'm defective, or I'm, broken, or whatever the case may be. And so you feel a little bit like nervous to have these kinds of conversations with someone that you are talking to because of the implications maybe that it means in your mind. This is so much easier said than done, Vanessa. So please don't take this as like, oh, just believe this and everything will be fine. Because it takes time to get to a place where we really develop this solid understanding of how broken all of us are. And the fact that you are aware and able to articulate and communicate whatever you need in a relationship is such a rare strength. It puts you like at the top of the game, in terms of the cream of the crop, in terms of being able to engage in healthy relationships. So I just want to encourage you with that reality that it's actually a strength when someone, and in looking for someone to have a healthy relationship with, you want somebody who's able to articulate their brokenness to you and be able to share what they need and works for them in relationship. It has to be reciprocal. A lot of times if we come to the relationship thinking, oh, well, I'm damaged goods and I have to ask for this, that, and the other thing, and the other person's so healthy and perfect and they're wonderful.
Yeah.
I really would caution you in that scenario. But, and it's a process. Again, it takes time to get to that place, but I just really want to encourage you that is a real thing. And that is a place that you can get to, with time and effort. So yeah, Vanessa, 9 years out and I'm still struggling. And I hear you. It's there's absolutely no schedule to this, and so much depends on the kind of support that you have in your journey.
Yeah,
you know, when you have good solid support and good wilderness guides that can kind of walk with you in your journey, it's definitely a little bit more efficient. But for many of us, it takes many years because we're sort of just stumbling around, just trying to figure it out. We get, you know, some guides and some helpers along the way, which is why I love what Lisa does, because she is providing a platform and a resource that can help people really walk through this recovery process. Because when you're having to do this by yourself, it takes forever, you know? And I'm a firm believer there's always hope. I really believe everybody can get to a position of thriving and building an entirely new life. But I do know, I do know that it's not something that we usually can do alone. We need community, we need support. And that's why Stand Up is such an amazing resource and such an amazing organization. And I love it.
Thank you.
So
I love how you encourage a community and support. And I know a lot of survivors on the page that said they don't have anyone, but not just that, you have us. There's different things that you can get involved with that are really important, because like you said, sometimes we're just stumbling trying to figure it out, and we can't because it's not that easy. It literally
exactly.
is not easy. But I wanted to go back on something you said, and I love when I was in the program at PBA, getting my master's, and you guys really just taught us to sit in our feelings. You know, oh my gosh, you and Dr. Lawson was just so, it's okay to feel. I feel sad, I feel hurt, and it hurts, it sucks, and it was okay. It's like the first time I realized it's okay to feel how I feel.
Yes.
You know, and I don't have to apologize for it. It's okay. Now, you guys, we're not going to stay there, but we're going to feel it because it matters.
Yeah.
Our feelings matter, and we're all broken. So the thing that you're looking at people, oh, they have it all together, or no one's going to want me because I'm broken. You said it perfectly. We're all broken in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. And the hard part with this is, you know, one of the things that trauma does is it compromises our ability to read and understand people, and it compromises our attachment style. Wow. So here we have this huge dilemma, because I'm coming out of this terrible trauma. I need support and I need connection in order to thrive.
Right.
But that's the very thing that I might be very afraid of for very good reasons, or the very thing that I don't have the ability to navigate in a safe way. One of the things I'm sure that you've noticed and seen in your work is how people who've been traumatized somehow gravitating towards more abusers. Right? It seems so unfair. And we won't get into all of that tonight because we don't have time, but I will tell you there are neurological reasons why that happens. Okay. It is absolutely like you can break it down and you can understand why that's happening. So I will tell you that that is a thing, but it makes it more difficult, because now the very thing that is most useful in our recovery is the thing that can be the most dangerous, and that is connection and community. Wow, so that's just important to put that out there, because I don't want to paint this glossy, you know, picture of, oh, just latch on to some folks who seem encouraging and supportive and you'll be fine, which you and I both know is not necessarily true. So the mission becomes then to become aware of your triggers, understand what's happening, learn how to calm your central nervous system. And there's all kinds of techniques that you can use, and different techniques work for different people. So I'll throw out a few, and then what I can do is afterwards, I can go into your comments for this live and I can kind of post some resources on different techniques and strategies. But there are different things like, there's all kinds of calm apps that you can put on your phone. There are relaxation videos that you can save in your browser on your phone. There's deep breathing exercises that you can do, like in the moment, anywhere, anytime. Like the moment you notice a trigger, you can take a deep breath in through the nose and exhale very slowly through the mouth. That technique of breathing slowly out through the mouth and making your exhale longer than your inhale is a physiological way to calm your central nervous system. Okay. When you calm your central nervous system, you deactivate the limbic system. So what you're doing is by calming the central nervous system, you are letting the limbic system know it's okay. You can stand down, you know, stand down, and the amygdala hijack can recede, and you can then have some clarity and be able to respond in a better way. So calming that central nervous system is really important. So you want to experiment with a variety of different things so that you can find maybe the 2 or 3 things that work well for you. So whether it's deep breathing or a relaxation video that you pull up on your phone, the sound of water for me is very calming. So even just, I don't know if you went on the Greece trip, Lisa, but when I was in Greece, one of the years, I literally recorded the sound of the water lapping up against the rocks. And I use that.
I love it. Yeah,
you know, it could be smells that you find comforting. It could be a stuffed animal or something that you have that when you hold it and it feels calming and it feels soothing. It could be a weighted blanket, which, by the way, Ollie's, if you are brave enough to get out there, Ollie's bargain discount place, they have some weighted blankets at a really good price. I'm trying to think what are other things. Any kind of mindfulness technique where you just kind of stop and tune into what's happening in your body. One of the things, again, another topic for another day, another thing that's very common with people who've been through trauma is they lose connection to their body. They become very unaware of what's going on in their bodies. And so one of the things I do in therapy with people is teach them to kind of reconnect with their bodies, because your body gives you so much information about what's going on with you. But when you're traumatized, you have to disconnect from all of that, right? Because otherwise you would be flooded and overwhelmed. So you have to disconnect. And unfortunately, what happens is after the trauma is over, sometimes that disconnection stays and you're just going along and you're missing out on all of this data that your body is trying to give you. So those are just some ideas on how to calm the nervous system. But that is a really important step in dealing with your triggers, is to calm the nervous system so that you can calm down that limbic system, make that amygdala hijack kind of recede. And then now you can go into some more long-term strategies of, you know, kind of like convincing your brain that, no, I really am safe. So
I really like how you talked about taking a moment to breathe, because that's probably one of the quickest things that we can do in the moment.
Exactly.
Taking that deep breath, but let it out really slowly. And it's like saying, no, I don't need help. I'm good. It's like you're telling your amygdala back here, I'm okay. Everything is okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I really like that, because deep breathing, I just started to do it while I was sitting here, because it's like you're slowing everything.
Yes. It really honestly works. But here's the thing. There are some breathing techniques that can be triggering, honestly, because depending on the trauma. So for some folks who've been through trauma, in some situations, there was heavy breathing involved. And so any sound that's related to that heavy breathing can be a trigger. So you just want to be sensitive to that and aware of that. So if there are some of you out there who are like, I've tried that deep breathing and it was terrible, and you kind of hate it when people keep suggesting it, you know, that might be why. And so it might not be that you're difficult or weird or anything like that. It could be that the sound of deep breathing is triggering for you. So finding ways to slow down your breathing, but without the noise of it, may be something that you would have to look at, so that you're not making it worse by triggering the limbic system to say, oh yeah, we are definitely in danger because I know that sound, you know?
Wow, that's good. That's good to know. I love how you're just like touching all the different, like, hey, if you don't like this, there's always this. There's nothing wrong with you.
Exactly.
Something different.
Exactly. Chris, I noticed you said yoga has done wonders. I'm actually in the process right now of becoming certified, because I do find that there's so much from that work that is helpful with working with trauma. And for me, in my particular faith background, you know, I'm choosy about the things that I engage in and the things that I bring to my clients. And so it's been an interesting process for me to find a place where I can do my certification and learn the techniques that I find so helpful to myself and my clients, and still, you know, sort of honor the spiritual space that I want to be in. And so that's been really cool. And that's something that I'm working on right now. And so, yes, I have definitely seen that do wonders. And Kim did say that some breathing exercises trigger her as well. So obviously you guys get it. So
well,
any,
we're glad you popped in, Kim. We'll see you later. Go ahead and watch the replay when we're done work. We're glad you popped in.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing.
Let me see.
Yeah, Danielle was saying deep breathing doesn't work for her either. And so that I really am, I'm glad I remembered to say that, because I do know that it's such a common recommendation, and people who find it, you know, triggering or not helpful are left wondering, like, what is my problem? And so it's important to know that. So it's learning different. I'm actually right now in the process of learning different breathing techniques. And there are ways to slow down the central nervous system with your breath without making all that noise or doing some of the things that can be triggering. So I'll try to find a couple of those instructions and post those as well in the comments.
So I have a question that came in anonymously. So how sometimes the person was saying that sometimes they find that they're triggered sometimes, where they're not really, they didn't realize that it was a trigger.
Yeah.
They find themselves going on to one of those modes that we discussed, but they didn't even realize that it was a trigger for them.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have any advice on that, or thoughts about, like, how come they didn't recognize that that was a trigger?
Absolutely. The really important thing to remember about what I explained with the neurology is that it's absolutely automatic. Okay. It is designed, because think about it. If the goal is survival, right? Survival cannot wait for understanding.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. True. The brain has to take over. And there's a reason why that term amygdala hijack is so appropriate, because it really is a hijack. It shuts down the frontal lobe, the executive functionings, which would give us awareness and objectivity and, you know, the ability to sort of understand what's going on. And it shuts that down and takes over. So there's a neurological reason that you're not recognizing it until afterwards. Okay. So what can be helpful with that is, this is where we go back to what we were talking about earlier, where community is so important, because if you can find a brave other. Now, one of the things you'll get to know about me, as if you talk with me for any length of time, is that I avoid the use of the word safe. Okay. Because the definition of safe is absence of risk. And when you're dealing with other human beings, there is never an absence of risk, right? So what I teach in my therapy and the work that I do is that we look for brave others, people that we can be brave with, right? So we find people who facilitate a space for us where we can take risks and we can be brave. And they're not going to do it perfectly, because no one ever does. But when they mess up, they own it and they're able to work it through with you. That's a brave space person. So if you have a brave space person, you might want to enlist them to help you, to say, hey, this is my trigger. These are the ways in which I tend to react. Can you help me catch it when it's happening? Okay. Right? And so because that's how most of us learn. When something like that is happening and it's automatic, right? Expecting ourselves to just get it.
Yeah, we're not even seeing it sometimes. So that makes
exactly sense. I don't know if that's really fair. Yeah, you know, to put that on ourselves. So if you can find a brave space other who you can enlist to sort of say, hey, can you help me kind of identify when this is going down? I want to start catching it earlier in the game, and ask them and coach them a little bit on the best way for them to do that, because sometimes the way that our others might point things out,
it's a whole nother trigger,
might not go so well. So you kind of have to train them a little bit and coach them on how to do that.
Yeah, that's true. I like it too. So it's like having a bestie, or if it's your spouse or a friend or your roommate, say, hey, you know, when I get like this, let me know. Tap in
Exactly. And if you don't respond well to being called out, you can maybe develop a little signal, a little hand signal or something, and say, just give me the signal. and I'll know what that
I
means.
know I'm doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Good. So this is a question over here. I found that I'm triggered by having to wear a mask at work. How do I work?
Yes. Yes. And if there's any element in your trauma of being held down or, being restricted in any way, then a mask would be very triggering. Okay. So since this is something that probably you have to do every single day, then one of the things that I would suggest that you do some calming meditations right before you start work that, kind of like right off the bat calms your central nervous system, because guess what? Just even on your way to work, your body is probably already ramping up because it knows what's coming. And so the anxiety starts even before you put the mask on. So I would, when you get to work, like kind of stop, take a few minutes, do some meditations. The Calm app is really a great one to use, or Headspace is another one. And do a couple meditations. Look for ones that are particularly attuned to like anxiety or things like that. And then even as you're putting the mask on, you would want to sort of really speak to yourself. Like that self-talk is really important. And you want to keep telling yourself over and over as you're putting the mask on, I am safe, I am free, I can leave anytime I want to, or whatever it is that your body and your brain need to hear. It's going to be uniquely related to your trauma. I'm sure if you think about it for a few minutes, you'll probably make the connections of why the mask is triggering this and what it is that you need to reassure your brain of. And so it's like literally like talking to your limbic system and saying, it's okay. I'm free. I can leave at any time. I'm safe. I am in control. I choose to put this mask on for my protection. And so it's just having that conversation with yourself every single morning. And it's going to be a process. It'll take a time to reprogram those connections, those neuron pathways that have developed around the mask. It's going to take time to reprogram that. Yeah. But the more you train your body to calm the nervous system when you have the mask on, and the more you train your brain to ruminate on the thought that I am safe now, I'm not in danger, I can leave, I choose to wear this mask for my protection, those kinds of things, that's what's going to get you to the other side, where you'll get to a point where you put it on automatically and it doesn't even phase you, but it takes time and lots of repetition. The brain needs a lot of repetition. Okay. Unfortunately, when you think about your trauma, sadly, there's a lot of repetition. And so we don't need to go there and stay there, but just reminding yourself that this programming,
it didn't happen overnight. It took some time to get there.
Exactly.
But Dr. Andrea, I love when you said, I choose to put this mask on for my own safety. And I think one of the things with survivors, we don't have a lot of freedom. Okay?
Exactly.
So when you said that, it just got me so excited, because it's like, I am doing this. This is my choice, and it's for my own protection and safety.
Exactly.
Like that are really empowering. I love that.
Absolutely. Even in learning to teach, yoga, one of the things that I'm learning a lot is this idea of control, and really teaching people to take, to recognize that they have a choice, because most people who have been traumatized, they did not have a choice.
Yeah, they took their choice away.
And this idea of agency is totally foreign. And so you have to keep reminding your brain, no, I'm choosing, or I have a choice, or this is why I'm doing this. No one's forcing me. I choose to do this because, and, kind of like reassuring yourself as to why you're doing this. That's all part of the reprogramming process that asserts and affirms that I have agency.
Yes. I have agency and I'm in control. She said, thank you. Tears of freedom. On the mask. So
yay. And thank you so much for the work that you do, man. I appreciate all of you guys that are on the front lines that are dealing with all of this right now. Man.
Yeah. Any other questions? Let me see if I have any more questions.
Yeah. Oh, Vanessa. I love what Vanessa said. She's talking about the charmers, the ones who come in. Because here's the thing, Vanessa, and this is a thing. Not only do those of us who've been through trauma, we we have compromised abilities to pick up on danger signs, right? But predators, and that may be a strong word, but I choose to use it. Mm-hmm. Predators know exactly what to look for.
Yeah, agree.
And they know exactly how to present themselves. And like you said, by the time they shed their disguise, you're already knee deep in, right? And it's just like, we need some sort of repellent.
Yeah,
I love it.
We should hand out repellent. It's so true. I love what Yetzi said. Hot yoga has helped her detox, for spiritually and physically detox. And I like that it helps me have control of my body, breathing, and environment.
Exactly. Exactly.
And for survivors, control doesn't exist. Even for, any type of abuse, even, rape or sexual assault of something, someone has taken that control and power away from you.
Exactly.
When, someone shared earlier, they've been molested from, I think, 12 to 15 years old. Someone took that power from you. So when you get the opportunity to get your power back and your control back, it's something we're just not willing to give up very easily.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But it's hard sometimes to recognize that you do have that, when you've grown up, because here's the thing, a lot of folks who've been in domestic violence situations, when you sit down and talk with them, there's oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes a history of trauma before that.
Yes, there is.
And so now you've got this long-term pattern of no control, no agency. So to get to this place where they now could assert themselves, this is a foreign concept, And I think in America, we have such a focus on individualism and control and whatever, that we look at people like that, like, what's your problem? You just need to get it together. Why can't you just do blah, 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 And so there's a lot of judgment and, just sort of like aspersions cast at people who are struggling to walk in their agency. But it's not easy when you've had an entire lifetime of that being robbed from you, So
good. Someone said, what do you recommend when your children experience a trauma with you? Pretty much two other questions said the same thing.
With you. Okay.
When domestic violence was occurring.
One of the things, gosh, there's so much there. I don't want to be the classic therapist, answer, but I do believe that children who've been through trauma really do need to have a wilderness guide that can help them, and someone who understands the concept of play. I'm trying to think of how to say this kindly, but people who sit with children and want to talk to them about their trauma just drive me absolutely insane.
Got it.
Because the language of children is play. And so if you can have access to someone who can sit with your child and use play to help them communicate about what they've experienced and to learn ways in which to cope and to teach them. But you as a parent, because here's the thing, as a parent, you're going through your own trauma.
Yes.
And you're going through your own recovery. So even though you are the parent and you know your child better than anybody else, at the same time, it's a little unfair to expect that you're going to handle your recovery and handle, all of your child's healing needs as well. So it's really important to have that compassion and to recognize that this takes a team, right? So if you have access to that, then I would definitely shoot for that. And thankfully, there's more out there for children than there is for adults, especially for children who've been through any kind of trauma. So look into that and see if you can find that assistance. And like I said, make sure that they know how to use play.
Play therapist.
Yeah, but as a mom, as a dad who's working with a child, you can teach them the same coping skills that you're using, right? Okay. So if you're using deep breathing, or you're using mindfulness, or you're using, scents or stuffed animals, or whatever it is that you're using to calm your central nervous system, you can teach that to your child as well. And you can even do it together, because sometimes we get into it with our kids, right? And remember how you were talking about earlier about how you're like in the middle of it and you realize as you're doing it that I'm in fight mode right now. We can do that with our kids, where they push a button, and Lord knows these children.
Yes, they do.
They know every button. that we have. And so you're in it with your kid, you're like, it's just one of those days, and you're like, especially these days. And you realize as it happens, you're like, oh no, it's happening. This is what this is. It's really not about them, not doing their schoolwork or whatever. It's about my trigger and I'm reacting.
Wow, that's good.
And you can literally stop as the parent and say, you know what? We both need a timeout. Let's stop right now and let's do some deep breaths. Let's stop right now and let's watch this video, that waterfall, soothing, whatever. And it completely short circuits the vicious cycle. So those are things that you can do with your child, especially when your child experienced a trauma with you, which is unfortunately fairly common with domestic violence. Yeah. You can teach them all these things that you're learning, and then you can teach them the same tools, and you can do it with them, especially when you find yourself engaged in that, that cycle.
You're calling me on my own stuff over here, Dr. Andrea. I'm like, that's me. We all need to calm down. Yeah, it's so good. It's so good. The fact that sometimes we're triggered, and yeah, that was so good.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I think is really hard sometimes, especially as our kids get older, is when they're disrespectful. Because when our children are disrespectful to us, it can really trigger that same feeling of being marginalized and minimized and not heard and not cared for. Man, it can cut deep.
That's true. And even ignore too. Like, did you not just hear what I said? Like, my husband the other day, and I was like, I'm like, he said, what's up with the ignore thing? I'm like, you don't understand. As abusers use silence as a way to either just control you and to torture you.
Exactly. Exactly.
You listen, you can't. That's not going to work. So it's funny how you say that too, because my son will walk off, and I'm like, if you do not get over here, and I'm like, but you just reminded me, that's me. That's me. That's my personal trigger that I have.
Right. And it's important to realize that. But, you can also then communicate that with your child if they're old enough.
Yeah.
Because guess what? This issue of trauma is ridiculously common. And so as they venture out into the world and they have friends and they have, people that they're in relationship with, guess what? If they can have these conversations with you and understand the concept of triggers and how their behavior taps into deep wounds that are very painful, the more that they can understand that, it's not that they're responsible for us or they're responsible for our pains, but they can learn to be mindful of our pains and our unique triggers. And if they can learn to be mindful of our triggers, then they will be mindful of the relationships that they enter into outside of our home. So I know as parents, sometimes we want to be really careful about not making our kids responsible for our well-being, which is so important. But at the same time, let's not miss out on an opportunity to build our children's relational skills and understanding trauma and triggers and how to be sensitive to that. Like, I believe it was John earlier that was asking about it. That's an important skill that you can be, passing on to your children through your own story.
Absolutely. I have a question. It's a little bit of a tricky one. I'm not going to keep you too much longer, Dr. Andrea, but this one I think is a good one because a lot of our survivors still have to deal with their ex-spouses or fathers of their children or mothers of their children who have traumatized them significantly. Whether like this one is through email or through drop-offs, child drop-off, through phone calls, they still have to hear this voice.
Yes.
They still have to read the words. They still have to hear that tone or whatever. How would you, do you have any suggestions? Yes.
The process is very similar, but this cuts deeper and this goes deeper because now this is the actual abuser. So here's the thing. Your limbic system is going to have, in order for you to get to the other side of this and be in recovery and not be fully undone by contact with this person, you've got to get to this really weird place where your limbic system recognizes that this person is dangerous.
Okay.
But yet also understands that I am now safe because I have removed myself from their power and control.
Okay, got it.
So there are two things that are really important. Number one, we have to probably get some help to make sure that our boundaries are in place, are firm and well enforced.
Good. That's good.
Right? Because if our boundaries aren't set up properly, then we actually aren't safe. So I can tell you about deep breathing and relaxation exercises all day long, and the limbic system is not going to be fooled.
Because your boundaries aren't in place, and they know how to step up. You don't have boundaries with them. They step up over your boundaries.
Exactly. So things like as simple as like if your communication is only email, let's say, I would, for me, as some simple boundaries that I might have in places, I don't read emails from this person after a certain time of day, because I'm not going to disturb my sleep.
Right.
Because I open this email and I'm dealing with him, or her. So things like, so that may be a simple, example, but that is an important one, because now this person is invading the restful time of your day with their email, and we're allowing it.
Right. We're not going to give them that power. I'm going to come into this space.
Exactly. So it's this whole business of exercising agency. And the more we exercise agency by setting up boundaries and deciding what's okay for me and what's not okay for me, the more we are giving our brain tangible proof that I have established a safety, a container of safety for myself, that I'm exercising my agency, and that I am safe now. Right. So it's about having strong boundaries, which means that you have to be rooted in a very clear knowledge of yourself. And you have to have, sort of gotten to the point where you recognize your triggers and know what you need. So you have your boundaries. And then once your boundaries are in place and you're enforcing those well, then you can use the techniques that we talked about earlier. So, let's say you have to, you got to go do drop off. So, you're going to see this person. You can do those calming techniques right before you engage this person. As soon as you're done with them, you want to do some kind of physical activity, even if it's something like I just go in the parking lot and before I get in my car, I do 10 jumping jacks. And here's why. Every time you see that person, I guarantee you, your limbic system talks to your amygdala, which then pumps out this huge surge of adrenaline. Because this person is dangerous. There's no convincing your brain otherwise. And that's not even necessary, because they are dangerous. So the body will pump that adrenaline out in order to fuel you for fight or flight. Right. But obviously that's not what you're doing. You're just doing a simple pass off. And so you do your calming techniques beforehand. You talk to yourself. You remind yourself, I am safe. I am in control. I am doing this because da. And you kind of have that whole conversation with yourself. You do the pass off. And then when you get back to the car, do some jumping jacks, run around the car a couple times, whatever you have to do, because you have to discharge the adrenaline. The adrenaline is designed for a physical response. But of course, you can't have you didn't fight, or at least hopefully. And so all you've done is a simple exchange or whatever, maybe had a few words, whatever the case may be, but your body got no release. And now you've got all this adrenaline pumping around. So guess what happens? Typically high levels of anxiety, possibly a panic attack, because the adrenaline has no place to go. So it would be important to sort of plan out, and if you can plan like your contacts to then coincide with maybe a walk in nature afterwards, that would be a great way to sort of
the gym afterward or something where you're getting that out.
Exactly. So if you can, do the calming techniques ahead of time, understand what your body is doing and why it reacts the way it is, and then give it what it needs right afterwards. Then you can manage those exchanges and those, those connection points in a way that's going to minimize the damage that's done to your heart, to your mind, to your body.
That's good. That was really good. That was like excellent, because my next question was going to be, well, yeah, because where does the adrenaline go? Otherwise, it's just sitting in your body. So
exactly.
The anxiety, the stress, the panic attacks. That was really, really good.
And this is how a lot of chronic health problems develop, because when the adrenal system is activated over and over and over and over on a continuous basis, it does damage to the body at a cellular level. And so now we're seeing, and a lot of autoimmune diseases are totally traced back to extensive histories of trauma and things like that, because the body turns against itself because it has no enemy to fight. And so what ends up happening is the body turns against itself, and then we develop these chronic health conditions. So it's really important to be mindful and aware of what's happening, and learn and practice techniques that will help your body to process all of this. It's a lot. High blood pressure, stress, like Marcy said.
I know you said you were going to end with this one question about forgiveness, and I wrote it down.
Ooh.
I don't know where it went.
Thank you. I remember that. Or thank you for reminding me.
Okay. I thought I wrote it down.
So the reality is, like I said earlier, just because you've heard this information and you might understand better what's happening doesn't mean that tomorrow you're going to wake up and you're like, all right, I got this. No more of this acting out business when I'm triggered. I wish. And so the reality is we're going to mess it up, right? And then, like I said, what happens is at the beginning, you tend to notice after.
Right.
And there's this feeling of, because now you look back, you realize, man, I totally messed that up. And I think one of the worst situations is when we do it with our kids, because you're like, man, they don't deserve this, and it's just, this had nothing to do with them. But whether it's our kids or, our spouse or a friend or a coworker, whoever it is, when you look back and you realize, man, that was totally a reaction out of my trigger. I shouldn't have said that, or I shouldn't have done that, or I've totally, like those of us who shut down, what happens is we just don't respond to people, right? So people are texting us or calling or whatever, and we're in that freeze mode. Okay. We're checked out. Like, I can't deal with anybody, can't do nothing. And sometimes that's hurtful to the people that we're in relationship with who care about us. And they're like, what the heck? And then when you come out of it, you have those regrets because you know exactly what was going on. You know that you were reacting out of a trigger. And it's like, now you've hurt this person's feelings and you feel bad. And so I think one of the most important things when it comes to forgiving ourselves is remembering exactly what we talked about tonight. Okay. Remembering that there's a neurology to this. Right. And that there's a whole automatic system that gets activated that is causing this behavior. Right. So that's the first thing, is just to remind yourself of the science and remind yourself of the reality of what you've been through and what that's done to the programming of your brain. Okay. So you just, that's where the self-compassion comes into play. Okay. Now, once you have that self-compassion in your understanding, then you begin to figure out, how can I take ownership of this? And so maybe you go to that person and you say, listen, I'm really sorry. I didn't call you back. Here's what is going on, And of course, we have to be mindful because, as Brene Brown said, not everyone has earned the right to hear your story. No. So we have to be very mindful about how much explaining we want to do, right? And so don't feel the need to go into this whole, long story because you feel like you hurt this other person. It may be just a simple explanation of, listen, I'm really sorry about what happened. I should have contacted you. I was going through some things that had nothing to do with you. Just assuring them that it's not them and that you're working through some things. I'm working on it. I'm trying to get better at it. And so please, I just ask for your forgiveness and your grace. And so taking ownership of our stuff, communicating with the other person, if that seems wise, and sometimes it's not wise. Right. As we well know, sometimes, leave it alone and just deal with it in yourself. And, have that conversation with yourself where you say, listen, I messed up and I choose to, and honestly, it can be helpful to say it out loud. I choose to forgive myself. I choose to honor the fact that I have been through trauma that has done damage to the way in which I respond and react. And I am working diligently to reprogram it.
Can you repeat that? Do you remember it all? It was so good, because I promise you, I'm not the only one taking notes. You guys are too, right?
Oh my God.
So you said,
I will try.
I choose to forgive myself. And I think these choose words, because we're taking our power back, we're taking our control. I choose to forgive myself.
Exactly. I choose to forgive myself. I honor the fact that I have been through trauma.
Yeah.
That programmed my brain, or damaged the programming in my brain.
Yep.
And I am working diligently to reprogram it.
Yay.
I choose to let go of this debt, because that's what forgiveness is, right? Forgiveness is writing off the debt. I choose to let go of this debt, and I choose to focus on where I'm moving towards. So lots of choosing, lots of agency.
Yes.
And it's releasing. It's letting ourselves go, releasing ourselves from the debt that we keep score in our minds, right? And we're constantly racking up this debt that we owe to, to the world, to ourselves, to God, whatever. And that's the other piece too. If, a relationship with God is part of your experience, then forgiving self is something that we can do in conjunction with that relationship with God. And we can go and have a conversation with God about the fact that, I'm really struggling. I'm beating myself up for this. I shouldn't have done that. I know where this is coming from. I should be better at this, blah, 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 all of that stuff that we do to ourselves. And you can have that conversation with God to say, I need help. Yeah. I need help in letting this go. I need help in receiving the forgiveness that you so freely offer me. Help me to actually own that. Because many of us, we can talk theology all day long. We can preach a sermon on forgiveness, but we're not walking in it. We're not owning it. Yeah. And I have come to that place where I believe that that's not something that we can just talk ourselves into. A lot of times in church, we get preached at in such a way that we walk out of the services feeling like, all right, I need to get it together and I need to do blah, 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 and we forget that our ability to receive grace, our ability to forgive, our ability to walk in the reality of who we were created to be, all of that comes from God. Yeah. That has to be given. And so, if that's your background, if that's your experience and you have access to that, and everybody's in a different place, and I'm always super respectful of that. But if that's something that's part of your story, then utilize it, and use that to your advantage.
Yeah, that's good. And be gracious to yourself and forgive yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I will be rewatching this video. I needed this video today. Perfect timing in my life. Yay!
Aw, yay!
Yay, Dr. Andrea, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I'm so glad that you were here. I was taking notes as though I was on the other side of the camera. I'm just so thankful for the gift that you are. I thank God for the gift in you and your willingness to say yes to be with us today.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad we were able to figure it out.
I mean, we were like, okay, no, we're gonna do God. What is going on? We are gonna do this thing. So Danielle wrote it down. She goes, self-forgiveness affirmation from Dr. Cunard. I choose to forgive myself. I honor the fact that I had been through trauma that damaged I told you they were taking up.
All right, now.
The program in my brain, and I'm diligently working to reprogram and heal. I choose to let go of this debt, and I choose to focus on where I am moving forward. Yay! All right, Dr. Cunard, thank you so much. We appreciate you. And you guys, I had it on the bottom of the other one. Phenix, www.phenixcounseling.com, where you can find Dr. Andrea. It's PHENIX counseling.com. I'm going to put it in the comments for you guys anyway.
Sure.
And please reach out to her if you need her assistance. And thank you, Dr. Andrea.
Thank you for having me. It was such a joy.
Thank you. See ya.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Bye.